Alright, so this is a demonstration I've been wanting to try with my 3-link trucks for a very long time. This is my axle plotter of science. And what it does is it's going to draw a line for the axle travel of the trucks. So, what I have is I have this pen, this rubber band loaded Sharpie, and I need to take the lid off and I can't. Oh, whoops. There we go. And what I'm going to do is I just move the axle and it's going to draw a line. And I'm going to do it a few times. I'm going to keep pulling and try and move the axle in different ways. And there we go. That is a representation of the axle travel of the 3-link trucks, drawn out by the trucks themselves. And we'll take a look at this real quick, and I'll show you what it's telling us. This angle between these two lines tells us the turning angle of the truck. So if I take my protractor here, and I zero it out, and then I grab that angle. There we go. So I'm measuring that at 48.6 degrees. So that's the angle that the truck is set up at. Another thing it shows us, this axle path is a straight line. That means that the turning progression is following this linear path. It's not, turning up and becoming more sharp and being an S-shaped turning progression, for instance. And so that tells us that. And also, you can see there's not really a lot of movement or deviation from this line. It's able to move a tiny bit, but really, it doesn't move a whole lot, and it's pretty much just a single straight line. So that's all really cool and interesting, because one of the things I initially thought these trucks might do was have a progressive turning action, and I wasn't sure, and I kind of went back and forth in my head on whether it did or not, but this definitely shows that it's just a linear progression. Alright, so some of you may notice I've got these big bolts sticking out on the 3-links, and that is because I want to run a couple of other experiments while I'm doing this to see what does and doesn't affect the turning angle of the 3-link. So, to start off with, let's get another baseline measurement. There we go. There's our baseline. Now I want to start off by just completely taking off one of the links. So when I do that, then what happens? So now it's doing something different, and it's not slop. That's very real. So what's going on there? There's probably a little more. No, there's not really any more slop in the system. It's just doing something different. So what's it doing? It looks like before it was drawing a straight line. Now it looks like it's drawing a circle. So it still feels very constrained. Oh, I see what it's doing. It can twist. Look at that. So it feels like it's doing the same thing, let's see what the range of what it can do is. So if it's twist all the way, if the axle is twist like that, and if it's completely twisted the other direction, okay, so depending on how much the axle is twisted, here I'll draw a line in the middle just of the twisting. It's more or less, it's probably it's gonna be like a circle, I think. So depending on how much the axle is twisted along that line, it can draw a circle within this boundary. From here, oh, I'm drawing on my thing here. Yes, it's got a big boundary in which it can move, right? So now I'm curious if I take this other linkage off, now what's the box it draws? So all right, so basically this has gotten really interesting. Okay, I'm gonna reposition the camera and we're just gonna look straight at this picture. All right, so this is the constraints that we end up drawing. And what you end up with something like this. You have a box here that goes boop, boop, like that. And then you have a box here that goes kind of like that. And the straight line is this corner right here from the bottom box and this corner right here from the top box. That straight line is the axle path of the 3-link truck. And it makes sense because you're adding that constraint plus that constraint, and this area is the area they share in common, and the area outside that it can't be in if they're both constrained. So it's going from that line to that line. Pretty cool. I have a couple other things I want to try though. All right, so how's that view? So you can see the angles that these are coming up at. And what I want to do, change those angles and see if they change the line that is plotted. So we'll just go from one extreme to the other. So you can see it was down low, now it's going to be really up high. I broke my plotter. So here's what's happened. I've run out of play in the joints at the bottom here. So I've run out of play and now it binds up, and so it has only a little range of motion. So you see this bent sheet metal piece here that this is bolted onto? Because it runs out of play, it runs out of freedom of movement, and this piece of the linkage rams up against it and has a pretty big leverage advantage, and it bends the whole thing. So I've broken the truck, the mechanisms, by putting it at such an extreme angle, and by doing that I broke my plotter. So I'm going to reprint the plotter and I'm going to keep going. I guess I'll be back in a few hours. All right, so I'm back. I've got a new plotter, a new paper. So let's start with a new reference line. Right, there we go, reference line. And so this is just the normal configuration. And now instead of moving these all the way back, I'll move them part of the way back, like that. All right, so I've now changed the angles pretty extremely, but not as extreme as before. And now let's see what the slot does. Oops, I keep smashing my marker. So look at that. So that has indeed changed the angles. So why is that? I don't think it's changed the angle as much as the angle of this bracket changed. So I'm measuring the angle that the linkage changed at 18 degrees, which is definitely bigger than that angle here. And I'm measuring about 6.5 degrees here for that angle change. So yeah, it's not all nice and neat, but something happened there. So that's interesting. All right, so we're back at the base configuration. Now I want to try and see what happens if I move one of these linkages out. There we go. So one is constrained by the spacer here, and the other is out in space. So it's adding about 80% more distance. So let's see what that does. So going by our theory, it's going to be moving one of the regions but not the other. So one of the regions is going to move somewhere and the other won't. So I'm guessing it's going to change our angle. That for that reason. So it's changed our center for one thing. And you know what? I'd say that looks pretty close to being parallel to our reference. So let's mark this with a line so I can remember which one that is. And then let's just scoot this back real fast. Yep. So it seems like the spacing side to side isn't so much important. It's changing something. What's it changing? Why is it lower? I think it must be yeah. So it's like pre-turning the axle. So it's not going to be turning straight anymore, but it still travels. The travel is still a straight line. So it's kind of like putting your trucks on crooked is what that's doing. So if your trucks aren't going straight and you don't want to re-drill your deck, you can ski-wampus your collars here. It's a good solution. All right, so that's interesting. So one last thing I wanted to try. I wanted to see if I can draw a line on this spherical joint here. Well, I can't really tell if that's a straight line. No, it's definitely a little bit of a spiral on there. That joint, you can see the line kind of spirals left. So I think what's going on is the rod itself, the axle, is twisting a little bit back and forth as you rotate right and left. And that's to accommodate for it following the actions that both the left and right linkages are wanting it to do. Alright, so now, just for the sake of comparison, I'm going to plot out the axle travel of a reverse kingpin truck. And we're going to see what that looks like compared to the 3-link. So it's pretty normal looking compared to the 3-link. It's pretty similar. But you'll notice one of the things that this does is I get lots and lots of motion side to side and in all sorts of directions besides just a nice straight line. So it looks like as I really force the axle and torque it, it's got a lot of freedom of movement to move quite a bit. So it follows roughly a straight line without a lot of extra torque and stuff going on. But because of slop in the pivot cup and in the bushing seats and in the fact that the bushings can load up and flex, you just have a lot more freedom of movement. And so all this extra motion that you're seeing, that's the slop that's being talked about when you talk about precision trucks and non-precision trucks. Non-precision trucks have a lot of this. And there's kind of different degrees of it. First of all, there's free play. So this truck has a little bit of free play because the pivot isn't a perfect fit for the pivot cup. And so it can move and wiggle a little bit just without hardly any force. And that's mostly the pivot cup. And then there's a little extra flexibility from the little bit of free play, or mostly free play, in the bushing, sitting in the bushing seats. And so that's mostly responsible for free play. But there's also the loading up of the bushing. So once I get past the free play, it can then use a lot of force and load things up. Oh, and there I pop the bushing out of the seat. And there you go. So just depending on how much load there is, there's going to be more and more slop. And all this slop means your trucks could be doing a lot of different things other than moving and traveling in a straight line. So a way to demonstrate this is if this line I'm drawing right there is your turning angle. With slop, I can get, say with a reasonable amount of slop, I can move it this way and then this way. Instead of an angle that was here, now you end up with an angle that is here. And if the axle's only moving up and down, so if the axle's moving vertically, it means it's going up and down, and it's not actually doing any turning. If the axle is doing that, it's moving forward and backwards a lot and doing a lot of turning. So this difference between here and here, I don't know, that seems like a pretty good, yeah, that's a good 12 degrees there, 12, 13 degrees of slop. So if you're losing 12 degrees of turning to slop, what that means is if you're not really pushing it and it's not really under load, the board might be turning at a 40 degree, rate, but once it starts getting loaded up and, the pavement starts pushing back on your turn, if you're losing 12 degrees of turning, that means instead of riding a 40 degree truck, you're riding a 27 degree truck and you're getting way less turn out of it than you would have. Whereas with a precision truck like this, it can keep at a lower angle and you maintain all that turning, and you also get the benefits of all this stability and control. And that's why precision is such a big deal. Now, this truck has got a lot more slop than it normally would have, and that's because I've ran it loose and I've lubed it up so I can actually move it for this demonstration. It'd be too stiff, and I wouldn't be able to show as much of an obvious range with it. So I've made it more obvious, so it probably has twice as much slop or more than a normal kingpin would have. But there's trucks that are this bad, and there's trucks that are even worse. So, you know, cheap trucks that have loose kingpins are easily going to be as bad as this or worse. So that is the end of my demonstration. I think we've learned quite a lot about the 3 links, although I still have quite a lot of questions about them. We'll have to explore those later. But for now, Longboard Technology, over and out.